All right, now we'd like to welcome on a recurring guest, a very special one. He is a fly fishing legend here in Northern California.
Oh,
He's
come
an
on.
author. He is a regular contributor to ActiveNorCal.com. Chip O'Brien, my father, welcome to the show.
Thank you, son. Both Zach and Brian behind the camera. So nice to be in contact. So we want to
Yes,
talk about NorCal in June. Is that right?
Yeah, so I wanted to have you on. It's, fishing is starting to pick up here, and who better to talk to than you? First things first, we're going through this drought, and
Oh,
it's
baby.
particularly bad here this year. And I actually recently saw some guides discussing the temperature of the lower Sacramento River. So, they're releasing these warmer temperatures out of Shasta Lake, and it's affecting the fish. So, tell me a little bit about how this warmer temperatures affect not only the fish but fishing in general.
Well, that's a really good question. And, it always comes back to the fact that people who catch fish love to get those hero shots of holding the fish, which requires you keeping the fish out of the water where it cannot breathe. So just a little bit about cold versus warm water. Fish, as you know, breathe underwater via gills, which can extract oxygen from water. The colder the water is, the colder the temperature, the more oxygen the water can actually hold. So as the temperatures increase, it's kind of like, if you've ever climbed Mount Shasta, when you're at 14,000 feet elevation, it's pretty hard to breathe. I mean, it's doable, but you get a headache because there's just less oxygen in the air. So it's not that the fish can't breathe, it's just that they have to breathe harder to get the same amount of oxygen. So, when a fish is on the end of your line, it's theoretically fighting for its life. I mean, it's giving its all to get away. Kind of like a sprint. I mean, you just cross the finish line. The thing you want to do most is go, and the fish does too.
Right.
And it's at that point that most people lift the fish out of the water, which is a little bit like putting a plastic bag over a runner's head. So, trout in those circumstances only have seconds before they actually start experiencing brain damage. Now the fish looks fine, I see guys literally keep the fish out of water like a minute. I mean, that fish may swim away, but within an hour or so, it's going to be dead. So,
Mm.
you know, raising the awareness on how to treat fish and, particularly if you really try to promote catch and release, if you want that fish to survive, to perhaps grow and be caught again, you got to treat it right. So here's some things you need to think about. Now, what I'm not saying is that you need to avoid fishing as it gets warmer. No, I mean, it's just really comes down to the manner in which you treat the fish. Um, be very conscious of how long a fish is kept out of the water. When you first get a fish, let's say you just scooped him up in your net and the fish is thrashing around, that's a good time to just chill a little bit. Just remember that fish is going
Mm.
and just it's really interesting to watch. If you really watch a fish in a net, when you first get it in there, it's kind of struggling. It's really trying to breathe. But if you let it sit for like a minute, you'll notice the gills start slowing down and it's catching its breath and it's feeling better. And I mean, you can just tell by really looking at the fish. So what I recommend is scooping that fish up into the net, leaving him in the water. I mean, the fish is in the net, but he's also underwater. Let that fish chill for at least a minute, maybe longer. But you should noticeably see a slowing down of the gill motion. If you reach underneath that fish, you can almost feel the body of the fish start to relax. It's not so tense anymore. You know, After that occurs, after the fish has what I call just caught its breath, then get your camera dialed in, get everything set up, lift the fish out of the water for 2, 3, 4 seconds, snap your picture, put the fish back in the water. So you just really have to be super, super conscious of that fish's ability to breathe.
Does it matter where you put the fish back in the water? Because, I read that like a stronger riffle might have more oxygen. Does that matter as much, do you think?
Um, I don't think it matters that much, honestly. They just need to be in the water. You don't want to put a fish that's been, really exhausted in a super fast current, because then it's just going to kind of tumble downstream for a ways before it can get its bearing. So, usually the way it's done is I'll hold the net with one hand, I'll put my right hand under the trout, and so I'm in contact with that fish, and then I'll start to lower the net with my left hand, so the fish is kind of rising up above the net in the water, and just don't push the fish. Just wait till the fish wiggles its way out of your hand. I mean,
Mm,
that's the surest way to know. I mean, when the fish says, "I'm ready to go," let him.
mm,
So the fish will kind of
interesting.
tell you when it's appropriate. Um, you know, you don't want to play a fish too long with the increased temperature. I mean, get that fish in just as quick as you can. And I mean, it's true. You're probably going to lose a few fish horsing them in that way. But if you're going to release that fish anyway, what does it matter? You know,
Yeah.
get that fish in as quickly as possible. Um, no problem with fish photographs, as long as you're not keeping that fish out of the water for only but a few seconds, and only after that fish has caught its breath. So those are
Interesting.
just
I
some
I never
guidelines.
heard of that, but it makes total sense. It's all about oxygen. It's all about like you said, the analogy of the sprinter at the end of the race, just catching its breath. Um, so that's good to know. Just keep it in the net, let it rest, and get your quick hero shot, and off it goes. I like that.
Well, a
Um,
lot of a lot of guys, they're feeling really good about themselves because they take the hero shot. Maybe they kept the fish out of water too long, and the fish appears to swim away, and it appears to be healthy. But you know, like I said, within about an hour, that fish is going to be dead, and it's probably already experienced brain damage. So,
it's like
you
it's
know,
like those climbers that reach the top of Everest. They don't die on the top of Everest. They die on the way back down.
right, exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. So it's just, being good to the fish, and it's just common sense. And you know, if you really care about catch and release and you want that fish to live, take a moment to do it right. That's all.
Yeah, it's interesting with the drought and seeing all the impacts on fishing. Just on the top of your mind, are there any other impacts that the drought has on like the main waterways that you fish here in NorCal?
Well, when there's less water, that means like rainbow trout, for example, are spring spawners. Hadn't been a whole lot of precipitation this spring, correct? So,
Very correct.
so I mean, fish need water to spawn, and very often, fish, for example, in larger rivers will seek out the smaller tributaries to actually conduct their spawning. And when those tributaries get super, super low, um, a lot of the gravel that would typically be underwater in the springtime is dewatered. So the fish have less spawning habitat, fewer fish can spawn. So, ultimately it's going to degrade the fishery. There are going to be fewer fish hatching um, after that. So, I mean, fish need water for everything, and spawning is a biggie. And like I said, this time of the year is spawning season. So, definitely it'll have an impact. Maybe it won't impact the fishing this year, but 2, 3 years from now, absolutely. You'll see the numbers in various streams won't be as high.
Interesting. Um, okay, enough of the downer stuff. I wanted to ask you that because I'm generally curious, but It's almost June here, and that's a time to be joyous. It's a great time to fish. And you actually told me it's your favorite time to fish here in Northern California.
Yeah, it
Why is
is.
that?
Well, there's no place that doesn't have good fishing in June in Northern California. It's just, you know, I'm a wild trout guy, and it's right at the cusp between the theoretically usually wet spring conditions, and it's starting to dry out, and the hot weather hasn't arrived yet either. So it's just ideal to be outside. In a way, I used to really dislike June when I was working as a fly fishing guide, because typically we fish until dark, and in late is like 9 o'clock plus. So very, very long days, but also very productive days. So, a lot of the insects that trout feed upon are just hatching like crazy. There's a lot of food available for the fish. So they're hungry, they're eating, they're wanting to put on weight, after a cold winter. So hatches are good, feeding is usually good. Um, if you get one of those like super hot days, like we know it will be in like July and August in NorCal, uh, typically you're going to kind of see a lull in the fishing midday. When I was guiding, we'd hit it hard early in the day. When it starts getting hot and 1, 2, 3 in the afternoon, take a break. You know, take a break.
Have
Go take a
lunch, have
nap
a
somewhere.
beer, relax. Yeah,
Exactly.
take a nap. Yeah.
And then go back out after dinner and fish till dark, and it should be wonderful. So the trout are really active. The warm water species, bass, are also very, very active in June. They just get off the spawning beds. They need to sort of ingest as much as they can. It kind of reminds me about one of my favorite streams. I don't know if they've actually talked to you about Antelope Creek in Tehama County.
Yeah. Yeah.
You might remember something about that. Up high, up in the higher elevations, it's wild trout water in a really, really great trout stream. And then as you get down closer to where it runs into the Sacramento River, fewer trout and more smallmouth bass. And that's also a real kind of fly rod. So one of my favorite places. Now, I probably will mention some locations in this podcast, but there's one thing I will not do. I will tell you where to go to find fish. I will also, in some cases, tell you how to catch fish, but I won't tell you both. I don't think that's fair.
You won't tell us what?
I will tell you where to go, and I will tell you how to catch fish, but I won't tell you both about the same place ever.
Oh, I see. You won't tell us both. I gotcha. That makes sense.
Well, I mean, the places we talk about, some people think we have to be ultra secretive. Well, that's getting harder and harder to do with things like podcasts and magazines and YouTube videos, and there's information everywhere on places to go. So, I will not, if I know about a place that I think would be ruined if people found out about it, I would never mention that. But most of our fisheries, thankfully in NorCal, are pretty healthy, and they churn out large numbers of fish and big fish, which is awesome. So if I were to tell you, there could be good bass fishing in Shasta Lake, would that surprise anybody? I don't think so. Everybody knows
No.
it's a great bass fishing destination. So I don't
Right,
feel like
right.
I'm giving away too much. But if I tell you exactly where to go, what cove to go, what fly or lure to put on, where to cast that lure, that's too much. Plus it kind of spoils, I think, the real attraction that people have. It's to be able to go to those places and figure things out a little bit on your own.
Yeah.
So
it's funny. I think I told you I was at Clear Creek fishing, and we just found a spot that looked good. We went, as deep as we could, and we realized we had to go a little bit deeper. And I kept trying, the nip that you told me to try, and then I switched it out for another one that I don't even know what the fly was, It just looked. I told my friend, I'm like, hey, just pick one out for me. Let's just be random, and it worked right away. So sometimes these things, as much as it does help to try the right flies, and obviously you want to try like the right.
Zach, I don't know. We're getting some. Zach, we're experiencing technical difficulties here.
I think that's on your end.
Your
there.
voice is it? Well, your voice is suddenly garbled. Every once in a while.
Can you hear me now? Can you hear me okay now?
Yes, I can.
Okay.
But just for a minute, you were kind of going out there, so I might have missed a little bit. But anyway.
Well, it was more just sometimes you got to try things out, and sometimes you never know what a certain fish that you're going after is gonna chomp on. You know what I mean? So yeah, I get what you're saying. You got to try things out. That being said, I do want to hear, what are some of your favorite places to fish come June here in NorCal? Let's go down the list and let's talk about it a little bit.
All right. Well, let's start with the Sacramento River, both the upper and the lower. From below the town of Mount Shasta all the way down to Shasta Lake is phenomenal. And one of the things that I think is just marvelous is that we're in a state of almost 40 million people, and you've got 36, 37 miles of stream. If you're willing to do a little bit of hiking, you can spend all day in a place where there's not only excellent fishing, but you won't see a soul. You might hear I-5 up above you, but who cares? It's still a delightful experience. So the Upper Sac is one of my favorite places. I've caught my first wild trout in Northern California at Sims Campground on the Upper Sac, so it's kind of got a little sentimental place for me.
Yeah. So for the Upper Sac, correct me if I'm wrong, you basically just want to. I mean, there's that stretch along I-5 between Shasta Lake and say Dunsmuir.
That below Redding. I have a sentence. Says, your internet connection is unstable. Okay. Anyway, I can't think of a piece of river.
Can you hear me, Dad?
Now I can, yes.
Okay. Here, I would just, so on the Upper Sacramento River, if say between Shasta Lake and Dunsmuir,
right,
you kind of want to just travel along I-5 and take these exits and go and find these deep pools of the river. Is that correct?
That is correct. The parking areas are pretty obvious. You can tell whether people have parked, and there's always a couple of paths down to the river. So just follow those. Watch out for poison oak, of course. But and then once you get to the river, you either have to decide to move downstream or upstream. But a good strategy on the Upper Sac is park and say, okay, I'm going to hike for 30 minutes. Up, down, doesn't matter. But get remote. I mean, because that's really the beauty of the stream. And if you get away from the parking areas, most people, I don't know, it's just a theory of mine, but it seems like in California, people don't feel secure fishing unless they can see their car, which I think is funny. So, put on a mile or two and you will not see a soul, and the fishing is going to be markedly better. So, and it's a gorgeous place. Bring some water, maybe bring lunch, things like that. Plan to be out there for hours. And you're going to have just an awesome time. And, I would group probably the Pitt River and the McCloud River more or less in the same category. They're both phenomenal places. The Pitt River is notorious for slippery wading. So bring a wading staff. It's not that hard. Just be careful, but you don't have to go out very far in the current to actually catch lots of fish. I've often referred to the Pitt River as the easiest place to catch a wild trout in Shasta County.
Oh,
so,
okay.
Yeah, and I mean it's kind of remote, and the fact that it's got a reputation for sketchy wading keeps a lot of people away. So,
Mm.
if you like to be private, that's a good place to go.
And all three of those places flow right into Shasta Lake. So they're kind of, that's what they're known for, and that's probably what connects all the good fishing, I would assume.
Exactly. Exactly.
Yeah.
Now there
So
are lots
once
of
you
other
get down,
places.
so once you get down below Shasta Dam, then what's the difference in the rivers?
Well, below Shasta and Keswick Dam, you've got the Sacramento River, you've got the McCloud River, you've got the Pitt River, um, and you've got Squaw Creek, all flowing in. And so when they come out of Keswick Dam above Reading, there, the flows are much bigger because you got all that water from all those rivers combined. So it's bigger. It's bigger water. It's regulated for agriculture and for salmon spawning. So it fluctuates. It comes up in the summer, goes down in the winter, that sort of thing. Um, Although in the winter season, before the flows usually come up in May. Before May, there can be wonderful wading opportunities in Reading, down below Reading, all the way down to Anderson. But once those flows come up, the drift boats really kind of take over. And it's not that they're not fishing at the lower flows, but in a drift boat, you're just going to have access to so many more fish. So,
Right.
if you got a buddy with a drift boat, or just hire one of the many excellent guides that run that river every day, you're going to have a much fishier experience. So, you know, the Sacramento River is like a national treasure. I mean, a biologist friend of mine told me that there are like over 1,000 aquatic insects per square foot of river bottom, and that's trout food. So it's no wonder that river kicks out, you know, probably millions of sizable rainbow trout every year. It's uncanny. It's amazing. So that's a real
By the
resource.
way, if anyone's questioning your clout on this subject, you are the author of River Journal, Sacramento River, the book. So I just wanted to
Well,
remind the audience that.
thanks for the plug. So some other places. I mean, some of the lakes are a lot of fun. One of my particular favorites, as I think you know, is Manzanita Lake in Lassen Volcanic National
So
Park.
I think I actually might go there this week. So I'm glad you're saying this, because I've been toying where I want to go fish. I'm going up there this week, and Manzanita's on my list. It's it's May, but the snow melts the snow is basically gone in Lassen,
Yeah.
unfortunately, already. But that means it's probably got like typically mid June conditions. So how can I go out and catch a fish there?
Well, again, you're looking at what is the trout food, and into colder months, the trout have to subsist on little midges, chironomids. But as we get into June, the larger insects, the Calabatus mayflies, are on. So the nice thing is a Calabatus mayfly is fairly easy to imitate. A lot of nymph patterns. A bird's nest would be a great idea, or beadhead, or a PT nymph, anything like that. And the trout are going to be looking for them. So put on a small strike indicator, toss it out. You only have to fish 4 or 5 feet underwater, and just keep an eye on that indicator, and you should do well. It's small enough so that even in a float tube, you can fish most of the lake in one day. Other anglers take little prams or pontoon boats, all good. And if you have none of those, just walk around the lake, particularly on the north side of the lake. There's some fairly easy wading, and you don't have to cast more than 20, 30 feet to have access to a lot of fish. So plus, as you know, it's absolutely gorgeous there. So why would you not want to be there?
Right. You have the views of Lassen Peak and Chaos Crag throughout. It's even if you get skunked, it's a pretty gorgeous day.
Well, even when the heat comes on in Northern California, remember that Manzanita Lake sits at about 6,000 feet elevation, so it's going to be much cooler. And if you if you if you decide you're going to spend the night at the campground there, or any of the campgrounds in the area, I'm always amused by people that think it's July, it's going to be warm at night. Well, above 6,000 feet, it's not warm at night. You have to really, bring your
Right.
winter sleeping bag and be prepared for cold conditions at night. But I can't think of too many places that are as beautiful and offer the spectacular fishing that Manzanita Lake does.
Yeah, I'm gonna go for it this week. I'll send you photos. I'm sure I'll get something. I haven't decided if I'm gonna hike around because I want to do a video with it. And, the camera on the float tube might be difficult, so maybe I'll do a
Right.
combination of the two. But I'm looking forward to it. And so you could pull out what rainbows and browns out of there.
Yep. Yep.
Gotcha.
Good sized fish. I mean, I think the average fish up there is probably 16, 17 inches. It's a good
Wow.
fish.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um, there's one thing I'd also like to say that I think another species of fish that eludes a lot of people are shad. Now, shad are going
Oh,
to come up the
thanks.
Sacramento River,
Yes.
and I think they're in the American right now, and they're also coming up the Sacramento River below Red Bluff. Um, you don't necessarily need a boat, but it gives you access to more water if you do. But shad, those are ocean fish. I mean, they're like kind of small steelhead. You hook into one of those babies, and you've got a tussle on your hands. They are a riot. So much fun to fish for.
Yeah, I remember in Chico they used to have these shad fishing tournaments, and they'd
Yeah,
pull out the guys would pull out 30 in a day.
yeah.
During the specific run. And actually, right now here on the American River in Sacramento, Keeney's Fly Shop is doing a competition. You sign up, and however many you catch, you win a prize. So, how do you fish for shad? I was always curious. I mean, I'm sure there's certain fly patterns, but is it similar to like a trout?
Well, I can only really comment on fly fishing. That's really all I do. But
Right.
the way I think of shad is shad are not difficult to catch. Shad are sometimes difficult to locate. And the way they go into fresh water is kind of peculiar. They come up in more or less a straight line, or not a straight line, but one after another after another. So when you find one shad, um, keep fishing that spot, and you'll just get more and more and more fish, one after another. So the thing with shad fishing is finding the fish. Typically, when I fish for shad, I fish with a full sink or a sink tip line. You want to get your feet down 5 or 6 feet at least. Um, they're not eating to well, they're not really eating. The anadromous fish, when they enter fresh water, they're there to spawn. Okay, but they will uh, kind of exhibit an angry response. They'll hit a fly just because they're pissed off at it. Bright colors, shad tend to like bright colors, chartreuse, bright pinks and oranges, maybe with a little bit of weight or bead eyes on those flies to get them down. Um, and basically, when you're shad fishing, you're swinging flies. You're not using a strike indicator. You're making a long cast. Let the river take the fly downstream, and it'll swing across in the current. And if you find the right depth where the shad are traveling upstream, you should hammer them. I mean, but it's great fun.
Nice. Um, One other river I'm curious about, which I've fished before without much luck, is the Truckee. What are your experiences on the Truckee River?
Well, there is a lot of Truckee River. There are a lot of people who also fish the Truckee. Um, you know, between the
It's
lake
famously
and
difficult, correct? I mean, it's famously
yeah,
hard to catch fish there.
yeah, it's I would say that most of the streams in Shasta County offer easier fishing, but that doesn't mean to pass the Truckee by. I mean, there are some enormous rainbows and browns, particularly browns in certain sections. Uh, Parts of that stream are stocked, and uh, once they put in some stock fish, they don't always stay in the same place. So uh, sometimes fish from the stock area will migrate downstream, and you'll pick up a few down there. But the best thing that I've always experienced on the Truckee is if you're not catching fish where you are, move around, try different places. I mean, it's jump in your rig and drive 10 minutes and try a different spot. And, ultimately you'll succeed.
Gotcha. Um, okay, I do. Are there any other places you want to talk about? Because I also want to get to some of the dumbest things you've ever done here in NorCal.
You pulled that one out of your hat, didn't you? Okay. Well, I would say, there's all kinds of different fishing out there, but we got two spring creeks uh, that are definitely worth mentioning. Fall River is one of the
Oh
longest
yeah.
spring creeks in North America. It's the banks are private, so you can only go in a boat and motor up or down and catch fish. But actually, I've snorkeled both Fall River and Hat Creek, the other spring creek I was going to talk about, and the number and sizes of fish in those streams is just staggering, particularly Fall River. So, if spring creek fishing is your thing, if you don't really feel like waiting, you want to go out into a boat. Not that they're necessarily easy to catch, but uh, I mean, it's so worthwhile. And the Fall River Valley is just gorgeous, and it's got all that phenomenal wildlife. You're likely to see at different times of the year deer. I've seen antelope over there. Bald eagles, all kinds of incredible bird life. I mean, it's just like being in paradise. You can close your eyes in a boat on Fall River, and all you hear is bird song. I mean, it's just amazing.
It's
And the other one would be,
so
go ahead.
well. Just about Fall River. It's so weird to me that it's basically boat access only. It just feels, uh, I don't know. I've never fished there because of it, and I know
Right.
how great it is. I mean, is there a way that you could sort of get around that? Are there places you actually can go and fish from the shore? There's none.
No. There are a couple of public accesses and public boat launch ramps where you can launch a boat. So you could maybe stand on a dock there and fish into the river. But as soon as you walk off the bank in most of Fall River, you're in 10 feet of water. I mean, it just
Oh,
drops right off. It's not shallow. A lot of the river is between probably 10 and 15 feet. There are much deeper sections as well. So it's not a place that you're going to wade. There are no riffles. The water is just complete flat water where you can see the fish and the fish can see you. So my strategy for Fall River has been launch at one of the launch sites, motor upstream, and with polarized sunglasses, you can look down into the water and very often see huge schools of fish. So when you see a school of fish, um, turn your motor off, drop your anchor, and wait 10, 15 minutes because the fish that you scared by going upstream, well, they're going to come back and they're going to continue feeding. So when I think of Fall River, I think of giant schools of rainbow trout, and there's some browns, but they just kind of move around. So they're not always in the same place day after day. They kind of migrate around in the stream. So you have to find them. But once you do, if you're good with, either nymphs is what you use probably most of the time, although uh, Fall River does get some really nice hatches, particularly in the evening, late June, early July. It's very famous for the big hex hatch, the Hexagenia
right.
limbata mayfly.
Yep.
Uh,
Also a
that
famous beer over there at Fall
Fall
River.
River,
Fall
yeah,
River
and
River
that
Brewing
is an
Company. Yeah.
excellent IPA. I love that stuff.
Yep.
Anyway, so a real adventure is Fall River. Hat Creek over just east of Bernie has been coming back. Um, you know, it was a legendary fishery back in the 1970s, even. I mean, people would talk about 100 fish days and so on. But then in the early 1990s, a lava tube broke somewhere underground, and, you know, hundreds of millions of tons of volcanic sediment uh, sifted into the stream, and what was once a deep river is now a shallow river, quite frankly, and that really devastated the fish. But you know what? Given time, nature can heal, and Hat Creek has been getting every year is just getting better and better. There are more fish and bigger fish. That's not to say that they're easy. I mean, if you want easy fishing, you'd be really dumb to go to Hat Creek, the wild trout
Mm.
section of Hat Creek. But it's a place where, if you think you want to hone your skills to some finicky PhD level fish, I mean, that's the place to go. But on the other hand, when you succeed, when you get a decent fish like on a dry fly, maybe you're throwing a 16-foot 6X leader, and your fly is maybe a size 18, and you can barely even see the thing. But if you're able to hook one of those trout into those circumstances, you've accomplished something, and you deserve to feel good about yourself. But it's also kind of a magical place. It's only the wild trout section is only about 3 miles between Powerhouse 2, Riffle, and Lake Britain, or the dam just above Lake Britain. But it's all great water. And now of course there's the footbridge that Cal Trout and some other folks got installed midway down, so you have better access to both sides of the stream,
Mm.
and it's beautiful. So
That's
you said
another.
you're going to
That's
go to.
another one. That's another one I might hit this week. I'm still working on my itinerary, but yes, I would love to go to the Powerhouse 2 Ripple. So yeah,
Well, you're
that's
not going to be alone.
right. Right. That's what I
And
imagined.
but that's the easiest place on Hat Creek to catch fish. Below there, as the water flattens out, it's a whole different game, but also worthwhile.
Gotcha. Well, it's exciting. It's an exciting time here in NorCal. And by the way, anyone who doesn't know, Chip also has a book,
There we go.
California's Best Fly Fishing, which basically has all this stuff in writing with great maps and everything. It's interesting because that book, I still go back and look at it, and certainly things will change over the years, with the fishing and these rivers, but right now it still holds true. So,
I'm working on my next one too.
okay, we'll get to that some other time. Although
Okay.
that's not NorCal, but so I also wanted to talk. You just did a small little series on the website about the dumbest things you've done in NorCal. So I want to feel your pain here and see you squirm as you discuss these things. So one of them was you went to the hospital from Poison Oak. What was that about?
Yeah. Well, I guess like a lot of guys, I love finding good places to fish that no one knows about. So I've been known to sit down with topo maps or Google Earth and just pore over uh, places to fish. And this is probably back in the 1990s, so I don't think there was Google Earth in those days. But um, I've got my Delorme topo map book, and it's got really good topo maps of all over Northern California. And I had fished Hatchet Creek kind of upstream from where it flows under Highway 299, just west of Bernie. And, it was rugged going, a lot of rock hopping. Some places you have to swim to get across. But if that's your thing, and on a hot Northern California day, it's kind of a pleasant way to fish. But there are no paths, there's no access. You have to just hop along boulders and swim to get in there. But in every little pool, you're going to pull 5 or 6 wild trout out, and there's some nice fish in there. So I'd had some really good experiences, and I kind of wanted to kind of have some more of that. And so I went down below what they call Hatchet Falls, Lion Slide Falls, and between there and where it flows into the Pitt River, I discovered there was a little dotted line, which means there's a dirt road. And so I parked my rig up on, I think it's Cove Road, and found where that dirt road starts to descend. It was much further away from the river than I actually thought it was, and it was a hot day. But I finally made down there. There's a little tiny powerhouse down there, and between that powerhouse and the Pitt River, I mean, fish on like every cast. It was the fishing was wonderful. And then as you get closer to the Pitt River, you start picking up some non-game fish species, uh, pike minnow and suckers and things like that. But below that little powerhouse was on fire. Um, just a warning for people. I was probably trespassing. Um,
Yes,
pretty sure I was.
you can't go to Hatchet Creek Falls anymore. It's trespassing now. They closed
Oh,
down
is that right?
that trail. Yeah.
So, I'm not really encouraging people to do it. I am encouraging
No,
people
yeah, no. It's more about how you're an idiot and decided to crawl
yeah,
through poison oak.
yeah. Well, I saw a rope, and I guess I confess to being a little bit of a daredevil. I saw a rope coming down a really steep, more or less a cliff, but I figured up around the top of that cliff had to be the road where my car is parked. So I managed to, I think I took my fly rod apart and jammed it into a pocket, which might not have been the brightest thing to do either. And I started ascending this rope, and it was going great. And it was an adventure that I wasn't expecting to have. But then as I got near the top, on a part, the rope went through some foliage that I couldn't have seen from below. And when I got about 50 feet from the top, I mean, it was just solid poison oak. And I'd come up a long way. So it was one of those things. Do I go all the way back down and then hike back up on the road? It was a hot summer day. Or do I just, take a chance that I won't get poison oak? Well, you know what happened. I went through there. Now I at least was smart enough to know I'm really allergic to this stuff. So I jumped in my rig, went back down to the closest bridge, dove in the water, and scrubbed myself as much as possible. But all of that was futile. I had to go to the emergency room and get a cortisone shot, and I missed 2 weeks of work. I was just an idiot. But
And that's why they call it the dumbest things. And then tell everyone why you shouldn't try to swim across the Sacramento River.
cold water, the effect that it has, cold water shock on the human body. You hear about hypothermia, right? You go in the water, you get too cold, or you're out in the wintertime in the snow and you're not prepared. You don't hear much about cold water shock, which actually kills more people than hypothermia annually. And I just happened to pick that section of the Sacramento River, kind of between downtown Reading, or the Posse Grounds rather, and Keswick Dam. That is the coldest stretch of the Sacramento River. So anyway, I was young and feeling invulnerable, and I've always been a strong swimmer. And so I was running the river trail, and it was a typical hot Reading afternoon. And it didn't seem unreasonable for some unknown reason. It didn't seem unreasonable to me that I could just take my running shoes off, tuck them under one arm, and side stroke across the river, saving myself several miles of hiking and cooling off at the same time. I had absolutely no idea how cold that water actually was and what it would do to my body. You know, what's your body? 98.6 degrees. So suddenly plunging it in 50-degree water, you know, more than just takes your breath away. Um, a few strokes into the river, I was already hyperventilating. Then my muscles started to freeze up. By the time I hit halfway across the river, my legs were useless. I felt like they were just, you know, big heavy logs that I had to drag, and I'm side stroking. Finally, I had to let go of my running shoes, so I donated them to the river just so I could use both arms. And I am not kidding. I almost didn't make it. Now I have swum across the river much further south, down around Chico, and it
Much
was
warmer
cold,
there.
but Yeah, it's
Yeah.
much warmer there, and it didn't have the same trouble. But up in that Redding stretch, I mean, there was another time when I was out on the trail and some woman had a dog that I think she was throwing tennis balls or something out in the river for, and the dog was going out to fetch tennis balls. Well, evidently the dog got in trouble, and the woman starts she sort of flags me down. And she says, "Help! Help! Help! My dog is drowning." And so I I dove in the river after the dog, and fortunately, and it really was fortunate because that water is, like I said, really, really frigid. Just by the fact that I got in the water and started chasing the dog, I was able to kind of lead the dog back to shore just to get away from me. So I was in the water much less time, but was able to save the dog. But it's not something I would recommend anybody do. Uh,
It's funny. We used to float the Sacramento River in Chico all the time, and it's much warmer down there.
yeah,
And we we made the mistake of bringing our dog Mocha, and
I remember
she,
Mocha.
she bit and popped multiple flotation devices right when we get in the water. So all she wants to do is bite and pop these things. So I had to. We're already in the water. There's nothing. There's nowhere to get out in this. Like, I guess it's probably a mile long stretch. I had to float down the entire river with her, so that she didn't pop everyone else's. And looking back on it now, I'm shocked that I survived. But yeah, it's much warmer down there. So I
Yeah,
basically just floated. I just floated all the way down. But yeah, that river's not to be messed with. That's for sure.
that's for sure. And don't make the mistake of thinking you're invulnerable either, because there are plenty of times when I could have used a good dose of common sense.
I can second that. Well, thank you for
What
coming on.
about what about taking you skydiving on your, what was it, your 18th birthday? I'm not sure that was
Yeah,
the smartest thing to do, at least with the company that we used. Do you remember that?
of course I do. We talk about it all the time on this podcast. How they have a lot of deaths there. I don't think it was as much of a problem back then as it is now. Now it's become really bad at that place, and I don't know exactly why. I don't think anyone really knows why, but yeah, I mean, just getting into an airplane with duct tape on it is usually not a smart way to go about life. Uh, but yeah, I probably won't skydive ever again. So it's just not worth it to me. But
Well, the first time I went there, they had to start the plane, they had to jump start the airplane with somebody's car.
oh my
I should
goodness,
have known something was wrong. Anyway,
I
we need to tell the
I
story.
suspect there's a ton of stories about that place that I just don't know about because I mean, just a couple times I've been there. So it's
We're not mentioning
yeah.
their name, right?
No, people know it's the Lodi Skydive Center. I mean, they just got sued for $40 million
Whoa.
uh, because they're not safe. Now they are. I mean, I don't know how much safer they were back then, but we talk about them quite a bit, and I don't know what they're going to do about it, but they might have to change ownership soon because they they just got sued and lost for $40 million. So anyway, well, thanks for coming on and talking fishing. It's an exciting time. I'm gonna go catch some fish this week, and I'll report it back to everyone. Hopefully, I get some good stuff. But yeah, it's beautiful right now. It's June or it's May, but it feels kind of like June because of the drought. But
Right.
it's beautiful. So thanks for coming on, and yeah, we'll have to have you on again to talk fall fishing when things change a little bit.
Well, I want a full report on your fishing experience, and make it so it's not all lies.
Well, you gotta make the picture, make it look bigger in the picture, right? But
Oh, I get it.
yeah, yeah.
Okay.
All
Thanks
right,
for
thanks
having me
for
on,
coming on.
Zach. All right.
Uh-huh. Bye.
Bye bye.